The Heart of It.
Roy West kicking in towards the centre.
A distinctly Tasmanian conversation.
I can feel what it will be like when Tassie plays his first game, and I just...
Lynch gathers, he's got loose men everywhere, but he decides to have a pump shot, and it's an absolute ripper! 200 goals for Peter Hudson. What a fantastic effort.
How did he do that? And Bear kick finishes off in style.
Up towards half forward, Stewart flying over the top. Oh, pulled in a beautiful mark.
Well done from Scott. After all, Shredder's got the first goal. Has it done?
Nichols has had the big ruck with it. Oh! Crosswell!
Welcome to The Heart of It. I'm Alistair Nicholson. Today, the vice-captain of the Tasmanian team in one of the state's most famous wins. An immensely powerful player with a prodigious kick and a penchant for a jaw-dropping torpedo. Doug Barwick was a product of the East Launceston Football Club, who was recruited by Fitzroy before a move to Collingwood that saw him play a key role in a drought-breaking premiership. But despite kicking the match-sealing goal as the Pies claimed their first flag in 32 years, Barwick regards Tasmania's win over Victoria the same year as his fondest footballing memory. This is Doug Barwick's Tasmanian story.
I was a Waverley boy, so really football was just a way of life. There was, that's what we did as a group. So started playing football at the Waverley Primary School, moved on to East Launceston in the Junior League under Ron Walker for a number of years. Then went to the East Launceston Football Club, played under 19s and my senior football there.
1983, you won the best and fairest and you represented the NTFA. What are your memories of that?
Well, it was pretty grim, the East Launceston experience. We weren't particularly talented, but we're a great social group. But the NTFA exposed me to a different standard of football. Playing against the boys from the NWFU was pretty brutal. And then it was the round robin. We played the TFL as well. But, playing against those more experienced players, they were bigger, they were stronger, they had better skills. It just made me very determined to become a better footballer.
Do you remember any players from that time who were particularly scary or particularly dominant that you played against and with?
Yeah, both. I can remember down the coast there was the Beaumont boys. There was any amount of them that scared the hell out of me. The Butlers, the Shepherds. They certainly were. It was a physical game back then. It was quite brutal. But I think Jack Myercheck came down at about that stage too. And I mean those guys had senior experience at an AFL level, a VFL level, but they had that physicality that as a young player it was difficult to deal with. You managed to get across the ground pretty quickly to get away from them.
Did you have any protectors at East Launceston?
There was a guy, there was a fantastic guy called Peter Looney who played down the coast. I think he was a Penguin boy as well. And Pete came to East Launceston and he became my guardian angel. Every time there was a little bit of aggravation, Pete was on my shoulder. So I walked a little bit taller, got a little bit cheekier, got a little bit more aggressive, become a more confident footballer just by having somebody there who I knew had my back. I mean, all the boys had my back, but Peter was particularly active in protecting us.
Any stories come to mind? Can you remember any in particular?
Oh, I can remember there was a couple of brothers in Wynyard. I can't think of their names. Gabies, the Gaby boys.
Yep.
And I can remember Carl was giving me a lot of grief. And I can remember Pete, at one stage being knocked to the ground, Pete picked me up and he said to Carl, this is my brother. When you hit my brother, I bleed. Don't do it again. And I can remember waking up from being receiving another blow from Carl, and I looked across, and Pete's on Carl Gaby's chest, and he was hitting him quite regularly, saying, "I told you what I was going to do to you if you hit my brother again." So, probably not a great story for kids, but that was the sort of level of protection that Pete gave me, and the confidence I had to play it a little bit more confidently.
Yeah, I mean, a totally different era, wasn't it? Physically, my memories of you are as someone who was so powerful and strong and fast and a beautiful finisher. Yep. Long kick. I want to talk to you about torpedo kicking, because that was a forte of yours. But were you always a bigger young lad coming through?
Not really. I was a bit of a chubber to begin with, and I didn't really know where I was going with football. I reckon there was a point where I was in the I went down to York Park to watch the Tassie side training. My cousin Ian Barwick, was in that squad, and I can remember going down watching those guys. I was just so inspired by how big they were, how athletic they were, how they moved the ball. Their skills were just the next level, and I thought, geez, it'd be great to be as good as those guys. And I can remember from there, I started running professionally. I rode surf skis for a couple of years, so I went from being a bit of a chub to becoming more athletic and more powerful, and that sort of was the hallmark of my game, I suppose.
So what got you into those other sports, and whereabouts did you do them? Were you on the tamer, or did you go down the coast?
No. Definitely the surf ski and surf boats were as a part of the Lowhead life-saving squad. Never performed a rescue at Lowhead because nobody went in the water, but we used to tail race at Riverside, up and down to Pig Island. There was a guy, Mark Youngman, who sort of got us into the surf movement and enjoyed it for a number of years. All the boys from East joined. And before that, about the same time, running with a guy called Gerard Snooks, and we'd run out at one of the local schools, and we'd do the coastal carnivals and run 400s. I didn't like doing the 4s and 8s. Gerard kept pushing me towards them, but just enjoyed that, and it was beneficial to what was to come.
Did you have any success as a runner in those carnivals?
Yes, I never died while I was running. That was I can remember I ran an 800, and I got to the 400 metre mark, and I was about 50 metres clear, and I ended up about 200 metres last. So never did that again. Got to a few semis got to a semi of Bernie Gift, but that was about it.
Where's the point in your early football life where you think, gee, there might be something bigger ahead of me? When you got picked up by Fitzroy, there's no draft, for example. So when did you realise you were on the radar a little bit?
Oh, I can remember there was a number of recruiters started to sort of sniff around 82, 83. And there was one guy, particularly from Fitzroy, a guy called Kevin Wright, and he was there all the time. So each week he'd be there. Mum and Dad would park on the outer side, railway side of York Park, toot the horn when I used to kick a goal. And Kev used to be in the back seat all the time, coffees, cakes, pies, saveloys. In he'd go, and he wouldn't talk to me a lot of the time. So he was pumping Mum and Dad for information about where I might settle, and that was the first that I sort of started to think there might be an opportunity to play league football. But before that, I never really had that aspiration because I just didn't think I was good enough.
You made a pretty much an instant impression when you got to Fitzroy. You played some excellent football there. What are your memories of your time at Fitzroy?
First game, 84, Cadinia Park.
Kick 3?
Yeah, I kicked 3. My first 2 kicks in league football were goals. But that same day, Mark Jackson kicked 7. Abler kicked 7 from a wing. Greg Williams had 42 possessions. I think 32 of them were handballs. So, there was a bit going on. But yeah, I mean, it was just all a blur. You get through the pre-season, and then, Wolsey come up to me halfway through the week and said, prepare well for the weekend. And I didn't really know what that meant, because and lo and behold, I played my first game. So, it was a special time.
Robert Walls is notorious as being a pretty hard taskmaster. Any memories jump into your mind at the mere mention of that?
Yeah, Rob was pretty tough, different era. I remember we lost a game to Melbourne, I think second round, 84, and Gary Pert was on Gary Lyon and shook his hand as a ball went over his head to kick the winning goal. So after the siren, and I can remember Wolsey ran us for 25 Ks around. We started in Fitzroy and we ended up going through Carlton, Collingwood, and we got pumped by about 80 points the next week. So, but he made his point, just don't goof off.
So ultimately, after a few years at Fitzroy, what takes you to Collingwood?
The Fitzroy Football Club for me were the players. Really tight group. Had a lot of success in the 4 years I was there. We were never out of finals, but we didn't have a home. We didn't have a future, as it turned out. So, and I desperately wanted at that stage. I'd been 4 years into my career, and I just wanted to play finals. I wanted to win finals. So, Collingwood were the avenue to that. There was a guy, Alan McAllister, who just desperately wanted me to come across, and he painted this picture that the next 20 young men who represented Collingwood were going to be pretty special in the history. So that lured me to the club, and you get there the first day, and there was an expectation of what you were there for. You weren't there to survive like Fitzroy. You were there to succeed. So that was powerful and consumed us until we got there in 90.
90's a huge year for you. You're playing a premiership with Collingwood, end of 32-year premiership drought there, but you're also vice-captain Tasmania in a famous victory over Victoria at North Hobart Oval. 18,500 people there, and Tassie hadn't beaten Victoria since 1960. Graham Wright, James Manson and yourself all play in that famous game at North Hobart and playing the premiership with Collingwood. State of Origin football doesn't survive anymore because there was a concern players would get injured, but you three were out there for Tassie. Would anything have stopped you playing for Tasmania that day?
Still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, that whole experience. And I mean, it started a few years before. We had a carnival in South Australia where it was Shorey's first stint at being the coach, and then we followed up the year before where we ran them close, and there was just a feeling within the group that was our chance to make a difference. You're right. In a premiership year where there was so much at stake, why would you expose yourself to being injured and missing out on that? I think that was the level of commitment we did have. It was just, all I wanted to do as a young player, going back to that day that I watched those boys at York Park, I thought that was the level of my ambition. I thought, if I could play for Tassie, that's it. I'll be a happy boy. But as it turned out, you get involved in a club that has a higher purpose. They wanted something very special, but at the same time, wrapped up in that, the Tasmanian thing happened, and it was the premiership was great, but that win that day was the most. That was the thing I remember most fondly in my football career.
Really, more special than winning a premiership.
Absolutely, because that's what I thought I could do. So that's what I was working towards. Playing league football was just a bonus. It really was, because as a kid, I'd pick playing for Tasmania as being it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what about the thought now that the next young Doug Barwick coming through can play for Tasmania at the highest level.
Well,
how did that make you feel when you heard the news that Tasmania was finally getting a licence?
the thought that somebody's going to come through a development stream in Tasmania, a homegrown kid, he's going to learn his football there. He's going to get a lot of support from past players and people with the skills to develop his talent. A homegrown player developed in Tasmania, playing for Tasmania, being successful ultimately in a Tasmanian side. Well, why wouldn't you be excited by that?
In 1990, the story goes that players were canvassed in the rooms after that famous win because Tassie then felt like it was on the cusp of coming into the national competition. Had to wait a long time for it, but everyone, I think bar one player who'd signed a very long-term deal, said, yes, I would play for Tasmania. That feeling of passion was very strong then?
Yeah, it was. It's hard to maintain that and to maintain the connection because next week I'm playing against Pritch. A week after I'm playing against Super McPherson. So it was difficult to maintain that connection with those boys because we had work to do when we got back. But it's a difficult one though, isn't it? I mean, how do you get all those guys who are entrenched in their league careers, they've got families, they've got homes right around the country to make that change and get back home and start up a side would have been terribly difficult. I think the way that they've set it up now and they've given themselves time to develop the pathways and to get it right based on the learning from the Swans, Brisbane, the two new startup clubs, I think they've got a better chance of being successful sooner. There's obviously a little bit of talk about a stadium down there, but I think there's a real chance to make that work and work successfully quickly, but be ultimately successful and financially secure. I think if they can do that, they've done a great job.
Your memories of the 1990 state game. So my memory of you in that state game is the huge barrel you kick from the left half forward flank down to the Letitia Street end. Yeah. And that's in the first quarter of the game. And then you got knocked out, didn't you? Did Terry Wallace get you?
Yeah, and it probably not me, but I think it was the difference between where we were at and our commitment to getting the job done, and maybe the Victorian boys. I can remember going for that ball. I can remember watching the vision of going for that ball, and I went for the ball, so I committed to getting the ball. Whereas Terry's thrown his leg in, and he's collected me with his knee. But that for me was the difference between where we're at. We weren't going to stop. Whereas those, I think the Victorian guys, they were there, but at that stage, even though it was early in the game, we were on top, and we demonstrated that by our actions. So got a bit shaken up, spent a bit of time on the bench, came back on, and I couldn't see anything. I just had these little pinholes in my eyes, so there was stars around my eyes. So for the rest of the game, I did a lot of shepherding and a lot of running to where the ball wasn't. But that was. But by that time, we're well on top.
You kicked another goal after that, I reckon, after you came back on. But on that barrel, talk me through it. The crowd goes absolutely berserk. I think the commentators at the time say Barwick's a chance here. He's a long kick.
That was Bernie Quinlan. Yeah. I think he was too kind by a long way. There was a bit of byplay early. There was a big, tall, ugly guy called Monkhurst, Damien Monkhurst. And he was gobbing off right from the start of the game, which was his usual MO. And I can remember getting that mark, and Charlie Manson was behind me, and Charlie said, barrel. And I can remember Monkey saying, you can't kick that. Not quite that pleasant, the way that he put across his thoughts. But I can remember thinking, well, stuff you, Monkey. And I pinned my ears back. It come off the boot pretty well, and I can remember trying to find him just to get stuck back into him. So it wasn't that romantic. It was just a bit of byplay.
The last quarter's got to be a dream. This is burst of goals, goal after goal. Hudson, Nichols, everyone's getting in
Colin
on the
Alexander.
Yes,
how good was he?
Four
that day?
goals in that game. So, and the crowd, it's electric. The atmosphere at North Hobart that day. Can you explain those closing moments when you know you've got the game won? The crowd is going absolutely berserk. You know, this outpouring of passion for their Tasmanian team.
Well, Tasmanians have always been passionate about the game, but they don't display it. They're not a noisy crowd, are they? They like mum and dad at York Park. It was one honk on the horn and that was it. You might have done something miraculous, but that was a level of excitement. But I do remember how loud it was at the crowd. The crowd was. They were just so into it. Been starved of success since the 50s. It was amazing. I've never seen a Tasmanian crowd so animated. And then it was hard to get off the ground. It was hard to get out of the change rooms after we finished. So, I've never seen a Tasmanian crowd react that way.
I wanted to focus this conversation largely around your Tasmanian experiences, but I need to ask you a little bit about the Collingwood premiership in 1990. Bit of a feisty affair, a lot riding on it. Terry Danaher got a bit worked up at points, and Gavin Brown and Craig Starcevich felt the brunt of that. But what are the overriding memories for you of that famous day in Collingwood history?
Well, the whole final series was feisty. We had the draw against
West Coast.
Yeah, and there was blues all day. Then Essendon throughout the rest of the finals, it was physical. It's the last great blue, I suppose, when Gav went down. I mean, it was. But I can remember getting back in the club rooms at half time and Lee Matthews just settling things down. He just didn't want the game to deteriorate to a tit for tat. So he got us back on the page very quickly. And you see early in that third quarter the determination of the boys to actually hunt the ball and not the player. The last quarter was a procession. And late in the game when we knew that we were ahead, the Tassie crowd was animated. That Collingwood crowd had been starved of success for so long. They were crazy. They were crazy for weeks.
Was there a Banks to Barwick moment that might have got them going a bit late, that might have been the sealer in that game?
Yeah. Banksy was such a great servant, played such a great game that day, and so desperately wanted to be a part of it because he'd played in 2 grand finals with Dakes and Shorey and hadn't got there. So, it was just my poor handball to him that forced him to handball it back. That was probably the end of Essendon. And from that moment on, the crowd just, they were amazing.
You finished your time at Collingwood, but you returned to Tassie to play footy. You ended up at South Launceston. How did that come about?
I maintained my connection with South through David Carey, who was a good mate. Played with David, probably the slowest back pocket I ever played with. They got Peter Carr and I back for a year in the statewide league. We had a good year. We got into finals that year. But I'd sort of outgrown Tassie. I had 3 teenage girls who wanted to get back to their mates, and we had a great year here. Really enjoyed it, but went back to Melbourne after that.
When Tassie comes into the competition and they're playing in the AFL for the first time, Doug, how connected will you feel to that team? From my perspective, I look at you and I see a past player. There's so much history and legacy there. And I think anyone who pulled on that Tasmanian jumper previously has got a huge stake in this. But how do you feel?
Oh no, my wife Carol and I were talking the other day about just even before the first game, there's so much to be done. Being a foundation member, we'd put our hand up for that. We would financially back the team, if it came to that. But the first game that they play, regardless whether it is, we'll be there to support them and become fans of the club. So no, we do feel like we have a connection, and we're just so excited about what the future holds for the club.
Now, I always wrap up these chats with a couple of quick fire questions just to get the answer in the top of your mind. So, best Tasmanian footballer ever, in your opinion?
Bulldog.
Best Tasmanian football player you played with in Tasmania?
Peter Looney.
If you had the pick of any player in the AFL at the moment, and let's not worry about Tassie coming in a few years' time, but if Tassie was coming in tomorrow, you had one pick, who would you take?
Scott Pendlebury, maybe 10 years younger.
Nick Dacos will do.
Oh yeah,
He's pretty good.
I think he's going to be hard to winkle out of that.
Yeah,
club.
he is. Who should be the first coach of the Tasmanian football team, the men's team?
The guy who has the greatest commitment to what is going to be a really tough job for 5 or 6 years. So, I think they need a coach that's going to actually grow with the group, and maybe not be results focused too early. So the one that comes to mind is, the current Collingwood coach. I mean, if that's a model for people management moving forward, and a young group at that, I think somebody like a McRae would be perfect.
And exciting that there's a women's team attached to this as well. This is an all-encompassing thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Why stop at a men's team? So that's a good initiative.
And one last one: best ground in Tasmania to play football at?
Oh, York Park by a mile. I can only imagine what that surface would feel like in the middle of winter compared to when we used to trudge through 3.5 inches of mud. So, I love the park, and fantastic venue.
Doug Barwick, absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Doug Barwick, Collingwood premiership player, proud Tasmanian State of Origin representative, Devils supporter. I hope you enjoyed hearing of Doug's Tasmanian experience. To hear more stories from our greats, make sure you subscribe to The Heart of It wherever you get your podcasts, or check out the Devils' official website, tasmaniafc.com, where there's other great content, and you can also join the club and buy official club merchandise. I'm Alistair Nicholson. Thanks for listening.